The blood money lay on the table between them. 30 silver dollars that would keep the bank from taking the farm, and Grace Emerson knew she was the currency. Her twisted left leg, bent since birth and weak as a willow branch, had never stopped her from working the fields alongside her stepfather and mother, but it had always made her less than human in their eyes. Now, in the spring of 1873, in a cramped farmhouse outside Redding, California, she understood that being crippled meant being expendable. "She can cook and clean well enough," her stepfather Samuel was saying to the man across the table, a cattle broker named Wendell Hatch, whose eyes reminded Grace of a snake sizing up a mouse. "The leg don't affect her hands none. She can sew, mend, all that women's work." Grace stood in the corner of the room, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her mother, Margaret, sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames as though she could find redemption in the embers. She had not looked at Grace since the broker had arrived an hour ago. Wendell Hatch rose from his chair and walked toward Grace with deliberate steps. She forced herself to meet his gaze, though everything inside her screamed to look away. He was perhaps 50 years old, with gray-streaked hair and tobacco-stained teeth that showed when he smiled. "Turn around, girl," he said. Grace did not move. "I am not livestock, sir." The slap came fast, her stepfather's hand connecting with her cheek hard enough to make her stumble. Her weak leg gave out, and she caught herself on the wall, tasting blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her mouth. "You will do as you are told," Samuel said, his voice tight with something that might have been shame if Grace thought him capable of such an emotion. "We took you in when your real father died, fed you, clothed you. You owe us this." Margaret finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It is just for a year, Grace. Mr. Hatch needs a housekeeper for his ranch in Nevada. After a year, your debt to us will be paid." Grace understood the lie in those words. Once she crossed into Nevada with this man, she would never see California again. She would work until her body gave out, or until Wendell Hatch tired of having a crippled servant and sold her to someone else, or worse. The frontier had ways of making unwanted women disappear, but she also understood that she had no choice. The law would side with her stepfather. She was 20 years old, unmarried and disabled. She had no money, no prospects, and nowhere to run that her twisted leg could carry her. "I will fetch my things," she said quietly. She owned little enough. 2 dresses, both faded and patched, a brush that had belonged to her real mother. A small Bible with her family name written inside the cover. She packed them into a cloth sack and paused at the window of the small room that had been hers since childhood. The farm stretched out before her in the morning light, the fields she had planted and tended, the barn where she had fed chickens and collected eggs, the fence line she had whitewashed 3 times over the years. None of it had ever been hers. She had been borrowing space in someone else's life, and now the loan had come due. The journey to Nevada took 4 days. Wendell Hatch had a wagon and 2 horses, and Grace sat in the back among crates of supplies, her leg throbbing with every jolt and bump in the road. He barely spoke to her, except to tell her when to cook and when to sleep. They passed through small towns and vast stretches of empty land, and Grace watched it all with the detachment of someone already dead. On the 4th night, they camped near a creek, and Hatch drank whiskey by the fire until his words slurred together. "You are lucky I am a patient man," he said, staring at her across the flames. "Another man might have had you already, but I like things proper." "We will get you settled at the ranch first." Grace said nothing. She had learned in 4 days that silence was her best defense. "You understand you belong to me now," Hatch continued. "Your family sold you fair and square. The law says I own your labor for 5 years, not 1. That is what the contract says, though I doubt any of you read it close. 5 years. The words settled over Grace like a burial shroud. The next morning they reached the ranch. It was a sprawling, run-down property with a main house that had not seen fresh paint in a decade and outbuildings that sagged under their own weight. Several men worked in the corrals, and they all stopped to stare as the wagon pulled up. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to something darker. "Get inside and start cleaning," Hatch told Grace. "This place has not had a woman's touch in years. I expect supper on the table by 6. Grace climbed down from the wagon, her leg nearly buckling under her. She had sat still for too long and the muscles had stiffened. She limped toward the house, feeling the weight of every man's stare on her back. The interior was worse than the exterior. Dust covered every surface, dirty dishes were piled in the kitchen, and the smell of unwashed men permeated everything. Grace set down her bag and surveyed the wreckage of what had once been a home. Then she rolled up her sleeves and began to work. By evening, she had managed to clean the kitchen and prepare a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and salt pork. 6 men came to the table, including Hatch. They ate in near silence, shoveling food into their mouths with the efficiency of people who viewed eating as a chore rather than a pleasure. One of the men, younger than the others with sandy hair and a sunburned face, caught her eye and nodded. "Thank you, miss. This is the best meal we have had in months." "Shut up and eat, Tommy," Hatch said. "She is not here for your appreciation." The young man flushed and looked down at his plate. After the men had finished, Grace cleaned up and retreated to the small room off the kitchen that Hatch had indicated would be hers. It was barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, but it had a door that latched from the inside. She wedged a chair under the handle for good measure and lay down fully clothed, exhausted to her bones. She woke to pounding on the door in the middle of the night. "Open up, girl," Hatch's voice, thick with drink. Grace pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering. "I am sleeping, sir." "I said open this door." "Please, Mr. Hatch, I am tired." The pounding grew louder, and then there was a crack as he threw his weight against the wood. The door was old, the frame weak. It would not hold long. Grace looked around desperately for a weapon, anything to defend herself. There was nothing but the chair and her own screaming fear. Then another voice cut through the night, calm and firm. "Mr. Hatch, we have a problem with the fence in the north pasture. Several head of cattle got through." The pounding stopped. "What, in the middle of the night?" "Yes, sir. We need every hand to round them up before they scatter completely. Could cost us a dozen head or more." There was a long pause, then the sound of Hatch's footsteps moving away and a stream of curses fading into the distance. Grace sat trembling on the bed, waiting for him to return. But the night remained quiet, and eventually exhaustion pulled her back into uneasy sleep. In the morning, she learned that the young man named Tommy had been the one to interrupt Hatch. When she thanked him quietly while serving breakfast, he just shook his head. "It is not right, what he plans. Some of us here still believe in decency." "The fence really broke?" she asked. Tommy's eyes met hers. "It did by the time anyone checked." Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Grace worked from before dawn until after dark, cooking, cleaning, mending clothes, and tending the kitchen garden she had started. Hatch made his intentions clear, cornering her when he could, touching her when he thought no one was watching, making promises that were really threats. But every time he tried to force his way into her room, something would happen. A horse would get loose. A fire would start in a waste barrel. Once, someone left the gate to the pig pen open, and it took hours to round up the animals. Grace began to realize that the ranch hands were protecting her in their own way. They could not defy Hatch openly without losing their jobs or worse, but they could create chaos that demanded his attention elsewhere. One afternoon, while Grace was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, a stranger rode up the path to the ranch. He sat tall in the saddle, with dark hair under a wide-brimmed hat and a bearing that suggested both confidence and caution. 2 horses trailed behind his own, and Grace could see they were fine animals, well-bred and well cared for. Hatch came out of the barn to meet him. "Can I help you?" "Name is Owen McKenna," the stranger said, dismounting in an easy, fluid motion. "I am looking to sell these 2 horses. They are good stock, broken gentle, work-trained. I figured a ranch this size might have use for them." Grace found herself watching Owen McKenna with more attention than she probably should. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with the weathered look of a man who spent his life outdoors. But it was his voice that struck her most, calm and measured, the kind of voice that did not need to shout to be heard. Hatch circled the horses, examining them with a critical eye. "Where did you get them?" "Bred them myself on a small spread I have about 40 miles east of here." "I am looking to expand, need the capital." "How much?" $75 for the pair," Hatch snorted. "That is robbery. I will give you 40. Owen McKenna shook his head. "Thank you for your time, then." He gathered the lead ropes and started to turn away. "Wait," Hatch said, and Grace heard the eagerness in his voice. "He wanted those horses." 60. 75, Owen said firmly. "They are worth it, and you know it." The negotiation continued for another 10 minutes before they settled on $70. Hatch went into the house to get the money, leaving Owen alone with his horses. His gaze drifted across the yard and landed on Grace, who was still holding a wet shirt, frozen in the act of hanging it. Their eyes met across the distance, and something passed between them, some wordless recognition. Then Owen tipped his hat to her, a small gesture of respect that made Grace's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. It had been so long since anyone had treated her like a person rather than a problem or a possession. Hatch returned with the money and counted it into Owen's hand. "If you are ever looking for work, I could use another hand around here," Hatch said. "I appreciate the offer, but I am particular about who I work for," Owen replied evenly. He mounted his horse, tipped his hat once more in Grace's direction, and rode away without looking back. That night, Grace could not stop thinking about the cowboy with the dark hair and the respectful nod. She told herself she was being foolish. He was just a stranger passing through, someone she would never see again. But the memory of that moment, of being acknowledged as a human being worthy of basic courtesy, stayed with her like a candle flame in a dark room. The weeks crawled by. Summer heat descended on Nevada with brutal intensity, and Grace's workload increased as Hatch expected her to help with the vegetable garden, the chickens, and the laundry for all the men. Her leg ached constantly from standing and walking on the uneven ground. She lost weight she could not afford to lose, her dresses hanging loose on her frame. And still, Hatch pursued her. His attempts grew bolder, his anger more pronounced when the ranch hands thwarted him. He began to watch Tommy with suspicion, questioning why there were so many convenient accidents whenever he tried to corner Grace. Then, on a scorching afternoon in late July, Owen McKenna returned to the ranch. This time, he had no horses to sell. He rode up alone and dismounted at the barn where several of the hands were working. "I am looking for work," he announced. "I heard you might be hiring." Hatch came out of the barn, squinting at Owen in the bright sunlight. "Thought you said you were particular about who you worked for." "I am," Owen said, "but my ranch had some trouble. Drought killed most of my grazing land and I lost half my herd. I need steady pay for a while to rebuild." It was a lie Grace realized as she watched from the kitchen window. She could not say how she knew, but she was certain of it. The man did not carry himself like someone whose livelihood had just collapsed. He carried himself like someone with a purpose. Hatch considered for a moment, then nodded. "I can use a good hand. Pay is $30 a month plus room and board. You will bunk with the other men." "Fair enough," Owen said, and that was that. Grace tried not to watch Owen too closely over the following days, but it was impossible not to notice him. He worked hard, she saw that much. He was good with horses, better than any of the other hands, and he had a calm way of handling even the most skittish animals. The other men seemed to respect him quickly, even Tommy, who had been the unofficial leader of the hands before Owen arrived. But more than that, Grace noticed that Owen seemed to be watching the house. Not in an obvious way, but she would catch him glancing toward the windows when he thought no one was looking, or positioning himself in the yard where he could see the back door. One evening, while she was drawing water from the well, Owen approached. "Miss," he said quietly, "I do not mean to be forward, but are you all right?" Grace looked up at him, startled. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a deep brown, almost black in the fading light. "I am managing, thank you. Tommy told me how you came to be here," Owen said, his voice low enough that no one else could hear. "He told me about Hatch." Grace felt her face flush. "There is nothing anyone can do about it. I am bound to him by contract." "No contract can make slavery legal," Owen said. "That is what this is, you understand. Slavery." "I understand perfectly, Mr. McKenna, but understanding does not change my circumstances. I have nowhere to go, no money, and no way to get anywhere even if I did. The law would return me to Hatch or to my stepfather. I am crippled. No one wants a crippled woman." Owen's jaw tightened. "That is not true." "It is true enough," Grace said. She picked up the heavy water bucket, preparing to carry it back to the house despite the way her leg was already trembling with fatigue. Owen gently took the bucket from her hands. "Let me. You do not have to do that." "I know I do not have to. I want to." He carried the water to the kitchen door and set it down carefully. Then he looked at her again, and Grace felt something shift inside her chest, some locked door beginning to crack open. "I am going to help you," Owen said. "I promise you that." "Why?" Grace asked. "You do not even know me." Owen was quiet for a moment, then said, "Because it is right. And because when I saw you that day I first came here, I saw someone who had not given up despite every reason to do so. That is worth helping." Before Grace could respond, Hatch's voice bellowed from inside the house. "Girl, where is my supper?" Owen's expression darkened, but he stepped back. Grace picked up the water bucket and limped inside, her heart beating faster than it had in months. That night, Hatch drank even more than usual. Grace could hear him in the main room talking to himself, working himself into a rage about something. She latched her door and wedged the chair under the handle as she always did, then sat on the bed and waited. The pounding came just after midnight. "Open this door right now, girl." "Please, Mr. Hatch, I am sleeping." "I paid good money for you, and I will have what I am owed." The door shuddered under the impact of his shoulder. Grace stood, looking around frantically for any way out. There was a small window, but it was too high and too narrow, and even if she could reach it, her leg would never allow her to drop safely to the ground outside. The door frame began to splinter. Then there was a crash from somewhere outside and shouting. "Fire! The barn is on fire!" The pounding stopped immediately. "What?" Hatch's voice was suddenly clear with panic. The barn held his tack, his feed, and several valuable horses. "Everyone out, now!" Grace heard the thunder of footsteps as all the men rushed outside. She went to her window and looked out. Sure enough, flames were licking up the side of the barn, bright orange against the black sky. But as she watched, she saw something else. Owen McKenna was standing near the well, and he was not rushing toward the fire like the others. Instead, he was looking directly at her window. Their eyes met, and Grace understood. Owen had set the fire. Not large enough to cause real damage, she could see that the flames were confined to a pile of hay someone had stacked against the outside wall, away from where the animals were stabled. But large enough to demand everyone's immediate attention. Owen nodded once, then turned and joined the others in fighting the fire. It took the better part of an hour to put out the flames and make sure no embers remained to reignite. Hatch was furious, ranting about carelessness and incompetence. He interrogated each man about how the fire might have started, but no one had answers. Tommy suggested a lightning strike, though there had been no storm. Another man thought maybe a cigarette had been discarded too close to the hay. Grace served coffee and cold water to the men as they worked, and when Owen came up for a drink, their hands brushed for just a moment. "Thank you," she whispered. He said nothing, but his fingers squeezed hers briefly before he returned to work. In the days that followed, Grace found herself looking for Owen more often than she should. She would catch glimpses of him in the corral, working with horses, or repairing fence lines in the distance. Sometimes she would find small things left at the kitchen door when no one was around, gifts she knew came from him. A handful of wildflowers, a perfectly smooth stone. Once, a small carved wooden bird that fit in the palm of her hand. She kept the bird in her pocket, running her fingers over its polished surface when she needed comfort. 2 weeks after the barn fire, Hatch announced he was going into town for supplies and would be gone for 2 days. The moment his wagon disappeared down the road, the atmosphere at the ranch changed. The men relaxed, talked more freely, and Tommy even brought out a harmonica and played a few tunes during the lunch break. Owen found Grace while she was weeding the kitchen garden. "Can you ride a horse?" he asked without preamble. Grace looked up, shading her eyes against the sun. "I could when I was younger before my leg got worse." "Why?" "Because in 3 days I am taking you away from here." Grace's heart seized. "What are you talking about?" Owen crouched down beside her, his voice urgent but calm. "I have been making arrangements. There is a woman in Reading, a widow named Mrs. Patricia Graves who runs a boarding house. She needs help, and she is willing to take you on. More than that, she is willing to stand up to Hatch if he comes looking for you. Her late husband was a judge and she still has connections." "Hatch will never let me go," Grace said. "He will come after me, after both of us." "I know. That is why we are not asking his permission. We leave while he is in town in 2 days. By the time he gets back, we will be halfway to California. The other men will tell him what happened." Owen shook his head. "Tommy and the others are with us. They are good men who are tired of watching Hatch treat people like property. They will not say anything for at least a day, giving us time to put distance between us and this place." Grace wanted to believe him, but fear had become her constant companion. "What if we are caught? What he will do to me, what he could do to you?" "Then we will deal with it," Owen said. He reached out and took her hand, his palm warm and rough against hers. "Grace, I cannot stand by and watch this anymore. I will not. You deserve better than this. You deserve a life, a real life." "You barely know me," Grace whispered. "Why are you risking so much?" Owen was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "At first I told myself it was just about doing the right thing, about helping someone who needed help, but that is not the whole truth anymore." He met her eyes. "I have thought about you every day since the first time I saw you. I rode away from here that day, and I got about 10 miles down the road before I knew I had to come back. I had to find a way to help you. And the more time I spend near you, the more I see your strength, your resilience, your kindness despite everything you have endured." He trailed off, then continued quietly, "I am not asking for anything from you. I am not expecting anything. I just want you to be safe and free. but I want you to know why I am doing this. It is not just about right and wrong anymore. It is about you." Grace felt tears burning in her eyes, the first she had allowed herself to cry since the day her stepfather had sold her. "I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything. Just pack what you need and be ready to leave before dawn in 2 days. Can you do that?" Grace nodded. "Yes." Owen squeezed her hand once more, then stood and walked away, returning to his work as though they had discussed nothing more important than the weather. The next 2 days were the longest of Grace's life. She went through her daily routines in a haze of fear and hope, emotions she had thought herself incapable of feeling anymore. She packed her few belongings into her cloth sack and hid it under her bed. She tried not to look at Owen too often, afraid that someone might notice and guess their plans. Hatch returned from town in a foul mood, complaining about prices and incompetent merchants. He drank heavily that night, and Grace heard him making plans to ride out early the next morning to check on a property line dispute with a neighbor. It seemed like divine providence, this chance that he would be away from the ranch when they made their escape. But that night, Hatch's pounding on her door was more violent than ever. "Open up," he roared. "I am done waiting, girl. Open this door or I will break it down and beat you half to death before I take what is mine." The door shuddered and cracked. The chair under the handle was slipping. Grace pressed herself into the corner, her hands shaking. Then Owen's voice cut through the chaos, hard and cold. "Step away from that door, Hatch." The pounding stopped. "This is none of your concern, McKenna. I am making it my concern. Leave her alone. She belongs to me. I have the contract. No piece of paper gives you the right to do what you are planning. Now step away." There was a long moment of silence. Then Hatch laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. "You have feelings for the crippled girl. That is rich. Well, Cowboy, if you want her so badly, you can watch what I do to her. Then maybe I will let you have what is left." Grace heard the sound of a scuffle, a grunt of pain, and then something heavy hitting the floor. She fumbled with the chair and the latch, finally getting the door open. Hatch was on the ground, blood streaming from his nose. Owen stood over him, his right hand clenched into a fist. The other ranch hands had appeared, drawn by the noise, and they stood in the hallway watching. "You are finished here," Owen said to Hatch. "All of you are witnesses." He tried to force his way into this woman's room. He admitted his intentions. That contract he is so proud of is void because it is based on illegal activity. Selling a person is slavery, and slavery is against the law. "You will hang for this," Hatch snarled, struggling to his feet. "You all will. She is my property." "No," Tommy said, stepping forward. "She is not. And we are all willing to testify to what we have seen here. The way you have treated her, the things you have tried to do. Owen is right. That contract is not worth the paper it is written on." Hatch looked around at his men and seemed to realize that he had lost control. His face twisted with rage. "Get out," he spat at Owen. "Take the girl and get off my property, but you better run far and fast because I will come after you. I will make you both wish you had never been born." "We will be gone before sunrise," Owen said. He turned to Grace. "Get your things." Grace hurried to gather her bag, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the worn fabric. When she emerged from her room, Owen was waiting for her. The other ranch hands had surrounded Hatch, making sure he did not try to follow them. Tommy met Grace's eyes. "You take care of yourself, miss. You deserve good things." "Thank you," Grace managed to say. "Thank you all." Owen led her outside to where 2 horses stood saddled and ready. Grace had not ridden in years, and with her weak leg, the thought of mounting seemed impossible. But Owen helped her up with gentle efficiency, making sure she was secure before mounting his own horse. "Hold on tight," he said. "We have a long ride ahead of us." They rode through the darkness, And despite her fear, despite her throbbing leg and exhausted body, Grace felt something she had not experienced in months. Hope. The journey to California took 5 days. Owen set a steady pace, pushing hard during the day but making sure Grace had time to rest. Her leg caused her significant pain, especially after hours in the saddle, but she did not complain. Every mile they traveled was a mile away from Hatch, a mile toward freedom. They talked during those days, really talked. Grace learned that Owen had grown up in Wyoming, the youngest son of a ranch family. He had struck out on his own at 19, determined to build something of his own. The drought he had mentioned to Hatch was real, but his ranch had not been destroyed. He had just been looking for a reason to get onto Hatch's property after Tommy, whom he knew from previous work, had sent word about Grace's situation. "Tommy wrote to me about a month after you arrived," Owen explained as they made camp one evening. "He told me what Hatch had planned, how he had bought you from your stepfather. I was working on a ranch about 60 miles away at the time, and I could not stop thinking about it. About you. It took me 3 weeks to work up the courage to ride over there, and even then, I told myself I was just checking things out, seeing if the situation was really as bad as Tommy said." "And then?" Grace asked. "And then I saw you," Owen said simply. "Standing there in the yard, hanging laundry despite everything. You looked exhausted and scared, but you also looked strong, unbroken, and I knew I could not just ride away." Grace poked at the fire with a stick, watching the embers glow. "I do not feel strong. I feel like I have been barely surviving." "Surviving is its own kind of strength," Owen said, "especially when everything is stacked against you." On the 4th night, as they camped in a grove of trees near a stream, Grace finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "What happens when we get to Redding? You are taking me to this boarding house, but then what? Where will you go?" Owen was quiet for a moment. "I suppose I will figure that out when the time comes." "You gave up your ranch to help me," Grace said. "Your livelihood, everything you worked for." "The ranch is still there. I have a man looking after it, and even if I had lost it entirely, it would have been worth it." "How can you say that? You do not even know me." Owen looked at her across the fire, his expression serious. "I know enough. I know you are kind, because I have watched you be gentle with animals and patient with men who did not deserve your patience. I know you are strong, because you survived months in a situation that would have broken many people. I know you are smart because I have heard you talk, really talk, these past few days, and you see the world with clear eyes. You do not lie to yourself about what is true." Grace felt her face grow warm. "I am also crippled. I will never be able to walk properly. I cannot do many of the things a normal woman can do." "You are not crippled," Owen said firmly. "You have a physical limitation. That is not the same thing. Your leg does not define you, Grace. It is just one part of who you are." "Most men see it as the only part," Grace said bitterly. "Then most men are fools." They reached Redding on the afternoon of the 5th day. The town was bustling, larger than Grace had expected, with wide streets and numerous businesses. Owen led them to a 2-story white house on a quiet street near the edge of town. A sign in the front window read "Graves Boarding House, Respectable Lodging, Inquire Within." Owen helped Grace down from the horse, and she stood for a moment, letting her leg adjust to solid ground. Then he walked beside her up the front steps and knocked on the door. The woman who answered was perhaps 60 years old, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Mr. McKenna, I presume?" "Yes, madam. Mrs. Graves." "The same. And this must be Grace." Mrs. Graves stepped aside. "Come in, both of you. You look exhausted." The interior of the boarding house was clean and welcoming, with polished wood floors and lace curtains at the windows. Mrs. Graves led them to a sitting room and gestured for them to sit. "Let me get you some tea and something to eat. Then we can talk." She returned a few minutes later with a tray laden with tea, bread, cheese, and cold chicken. Grace realized she was ravenous and had to force herself to eat slowly, remembering her manners. Mrs. Graves watched them both with a measuring gaze. "Mr. McKenna wrote to me about your situation," she said to Grace. "I want you to know that you are safe here. I have already spoken with the sheriff, who is a friend of mine. If Wendell Hatch comes looking for you, he will find that California does not look kindly on men who traffic in human beings. The contract," Grace began, "is illegal and unenforceable," Mrs. Graves said firmly. "My late husband was a judge in this town for 20 years. I know the law. What was done to you was wrong, and it will not stand. Now, as I understand it, you need work and a place to stay." "Yes, madam," Grace said. "I need someone to help run this establishment, cooking, cleaning, some light bookkeeping. The work is steady but not excessive. I pay $20 a month plus room and board. Does that suit you?" $20 a month, more than Grace had ever dreamed of earning. "Yes, madam, very much." "Good, then it is settled." Mrs. Graves turned to Owen. "And what about you, Mr. McKenna? Will you be staying in Redding?" Owen glanced at Grace, and she saw uncertainty in his expression for the first time since they had left Nevada. "I have not decided yet. I have a room available if you need a place to stay while you figure things out," Mrs. Graves offered. 30 cents a night or $5 for the month. "Thank you, madam. I might take you up on that." Mrs. Graves showed Grace to a small but comfortable room on the second floor. It had a real bed with a quilt, a dresser, a washstand with a mirror, and a window that looked out over a garden. Grace set down her cloth bag and simply stood for a moment, overwhelmed by the sudden change in her circumstances. "You are safe now, dear," Mrs. Graves said gently from the doorway. "You can rest." When Mrs. Graves had gone, Grace sat on the bed and let herself cry. She cried for the months of fear and degradation, for the family that had sold her, for the girl she had been before the world taught her that being different meant being worthless. And she cried with relief, with gratitude, with the strange, fragile sensation of hope. After a while, there was a soft knock on the door. "Grace, it is Owen. May I come in?" Grace wiped her face and opened the door. Owen stood in the hallway, his hat in his hands. "I wanted to make sure you are all right." "I am, thank you for everything." "You do not have to thank me." "Yes, I do. You risked your life to help me. You gave up weeks of your time, spent your money, and faced down Hatch. I owe you more than I can ever repay." Owen shook his head. "You do not owe me anything. I did what I did because I wanted to, because you deserve to be free." He hesitated, then continued. "I told Mrs. Graves I would stay in town for a while. I want to make sure Hatch does not come after you. And—" He paused, searching for words. "And I am not ready to say goodbye, not yet." Grace felt her heart stutter. "I am not ready either." They stood looking at each other for a long moment, and Grace realized that something had shifted between them during those 5 days on the road. What had started as gratitude and respect had deepened into something more, something that both excited and terrified her. "I should let you rest," Owen said finally. "But if you would allow it, I would like to call on you properly. Take you to dinner, maybe, or just sit and talk." "I would like that very much," Grace said softly. Owen smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "Good. Then I will see you tomorrow." Over the following weeks, Grace began to build a new life. She threw herself into her work at the boarding house, discovering that she was good at managing the household, at making the guests feel welcome, at keeping track of supplies and expenses. Mrs. Graves was a patient teacher and a kind employer, And for the first time in Grace's life, she felt valued for her abilities rather than judged for her limitations. And through it all, Owen was there. He took a job at a ranch just outside of town, working as a horse trainer. But every evening he would come to the boarding house, and he and Grace would sit on the front porch or walk slowly through town, talking about everything and nothing. He never pushed her, never demanded more than she was ready to give. He simply showed up, day after day, steady as the sunrise. Grace found herself falling in love with him in small increments. The way he always made sure to walk on her weaker side, ready to offer support if she needed it, but never making her feel helpless. The way he listened when she talked, really listened, as though her words mattered. The way he looked at her, not with pity or calculation, but with warmth and respect, and something that might have been wonder. 6 weeks after their arrival in Reading, Wendell Hatch came to town. Grace was in the kitchen of the boarding house when Mrs. Graves came to find her, her expression grim. "Hatch is at the sheriff's office making noise about stolen property. You should stay here while I go sort this out." But Grace had not fled across state lines just to hide. "No," she said, setting down the pot she was washing. "I am going with you, Mrs." Graves studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but I do the talking." They walked together to the sheriff's office, Grace limping on her weak leg but holding her head high. Inside, Hatch was red-faced and shouting at a calm, gray-haired man Grace assumed was the sheriff. Owen was also there, standing with his arms crossed, his expression thunderous. "There she is," Hatch shouted when Grace entered. "That is my property. She is bound to me by legal contract." "Mr. Hatch," the sheriff said wearily, "I have already explained that California law does not recognize contracts of indentured servitude. What you describe is slavery, which has been illegal in this state since its founding. She owes me money. Her family sold her to me. And I am sure that was very wrong of her family," Mrs. Graves said coldly. "But it does not make the transaction legal. Grace is a free woman and she is employed by me. If you continue to harass her, I will have you arrested. You cannot arrest me for claiming what is mine." "I can arrest you for disturbing the peace, for making threats, and for attempting to enforce an illegal contract," the sheriff said. "Now, you have 3 choices, Mr. Hatch. You can leave town peacefully. You can spend the night in my jail and leave town tomorrow. Or you can try to cause more trouble, in which case I will charge you with attempted kidnapping. What will it be?" Hatch's face went through several shades of purple, his eyes fixed on Grace with pure hatred. "This is not over, girl. You think you are safe here, but you are not. I will make you regret the day you ran from me." Owen moved then, stepping between Hatch and Grace. "If you come near her again, you will deal with me. And I promise you, Hatch, that as a confrontation you will not win." For a moment, Grace thought Hatch might swing at Owen. But the sheriff stepped forward, his hand resting on the gun at his belt. "That is enough. Mr. Hatch, you are leaving town, now." Hatch pointed a shaking finger at Grace. "You are dead to me, you hear me? Dead." "Then stop talking to a dead woman and get out of my town," the sheriff said flatly. They watched through the window as Hatch mounted his horse and rode away, still muttering threats. When he was out of sight, Grace realized she was shaking. Owen put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "He is gone. You are safe." "He meant those threats," Grace said. "He will not give up." "Then we will deal with him if he comes back," Mrs. Graves said firmly. "But for now, let us go home." That evening, Owen stayed later than usual on the front porch of the boarding house. The other residents had gone to bed, and Grace and Owen sat in the cooling air, listening to the sounds of the town settling into sleep. "I was so scared today," Grace admitted. "Seeing him again, hearing his voice. For a moment I was back in that room listening to him pound on my door." "But you are not in that room," Owen said gently. "You are here in California, free and safe. Hatch has no power over you anymore. He could still hurt me, or hurt you for helping me. He could try, but I am not afraid of Wendell Hatch." Owen turned to face her fully. "Grace, I need to tell you something. These past weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you have been the best of my life. You are the strongest, kindest, most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I—" He paused as though gathering courage. "I have fallen in love with you. Completely and irrevocably in love with you." Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. "Owen." "You do not have to say anything back," Owen continued quickly. "I know I am not much, just a cowboy with a small ranch and no family to speak of. I know you have been through hell, and the last thing you need is someone pushing you into something you are not ready for. But I wanted you to know how I feel. I wanted you to know that when I look at you, I see my future. I see home." Grace reached out and took his hand. "You are not just anything. You are the man who saved my life, who gave me back my dignity, my freedom. You are the man who showed me that I am worth something, that my leg does not define my value." She took a shaky breath. "And I have fallen in love with you too. I tried not to. I told myself I was being foolish, that you were just being kind, that a man like you could never truly want a woman like me, but I cannot help it. I love you, Owen McKenna." Owen's face lit up with a joy so pure it took Grace's breath away. "Truly, truly." He leaned forward and kissed her, gentle and sweet, a promise more than a passion. When they parted, Grace was smiling through her tears. "Marry me," Owen said. "I know it is fast, I know we have only known each other a few months, but I have never been more certain of anything. Marry me, Grace. Let me spend the rest of my life loving you." "Yes," Grace whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the town church. Mrs. Graves stood up as Grace's witness, and Tommy, who had left Hatch's ranch and found work nearby, stood up for Owen. The ceremony was simple, but to Grace, it was more beautiful than any grand affair could have been. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and Owen kissed her in front of the small gathering of friends, Grace felt something she had not experienced in years. She felt whole. They moved into a small house on the outskirts of Redding, close enough to town for Grace to continue helping Mrs. Graves a few days a week, but with enough land for Owen to start building up a horse breeding operation. Grace discovered that she had a talent for the business side of ranching, keeping the books and negotiating sales, while Owen handled the training and care of the animals. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Grace's leg continued to cause her pain, especially during cold weather or after long days of work. There were times when she felt frustrated by her limitations, by the things she could not do as easily as other women. But Owen was always patient, always supportive, finding ways to adapt their life to accommodate her needs without making her feel diminished. And slowly, Grace began to believe what Owen had been telling her all along, that her worth was not determined by her physical ability, that she was valuable, lovable, worthy of respect and kindness. 2 years after their wedding, Grace realized she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She had never thought she would have children, had never believed any man would want to build a family with her. And now, here she was, carrying Owen's child. The pregnancy was difficult. Grace's weak leg made her balance uncertain, and she had to be careful not to fall. She tired easily and had trouble sleeping. But Owen was attentive and careful, helping her with tasks that had become too challenging and making sure she rested. In the spring of 1877, Grace gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel, after Owen's father. The baby had dark hair like Owen and Grace's green eyes, and from the moment Grace held him, she felt a love so fierce it frightened her. "Look at him," Owen whispered, touching their son's tiny hand. "He is perfect." "He is," Grace agreed. "He is absolutely perfect." As Samuel grew, Grace discovered the deep joy of motherhood. She had worried that her leg would make caring for an active child difficult, but she and Owen worked together, finding solutions to every challenge. When Samuel learned to walk, Owen built a small fence around the house to give him a safe place to explore while Grace could supervise from the porch. When he grew old enough to help with the horses, Grace taught him to be gentle and patient, lessons she had learned from watching Owen. 3 years after Samuel's birth, Grace had a second child, a daughter they named Clara. Then, 2 years after that, another son they called James. The house that had started out so quiet filled with laughter and noise, with the constant motion of children and the warm chaos of family life. Through it all, Owen remained the steady center of Grace's world. He never stopped looking at her with love and respect. He never made her feel lesser because of her leg. He built their life around mutual support and partnership, valuing her contributions as much as his own. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Owen gave Grace a gift, a painting of the boarding house in Reading where they had first found safety. "I want you to always remember," he said, "that you are the bravest person I know. You survived things that would have destroyed other people, and you came through it with your kindness intact. I am proud to be your husband." Grace looked at the painting, then at the man she loved, at the home they had built together, at the life they had created. She thought about the girl who had been sold like livestock, who had believed herself worthless, who had thought there was no future beyond survival. And she thought about the woman she had become, a wife, a mother, a partner in a thriving business, a person of value and dignity. "I love you," she told Owen. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Thank you for giving me back my life." "You gave me mine," Owen said, pulling her close. "You gave me everything." As their children grew, Grace made sure to teach them the lessons she had learned so painfully. She taught them that every person has inherent worth, regardless of their physical abilities or circumstances. She taught them to stand up for those who could not stand up for themselves. She taught them that true strength is not about physical power, but about kindness, resilience, and the courage to keep going even when everything seems hopeless. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man who had his father's way with horses and his mother's head for business. Clara was fierce and bright, with a passion for justice that Grace recognized in herself. And James was the peacemaker, gentle and empathetic, always looking out for others. 20 years after Grace had been sold to pay her stepfather's debts, she stood on the porch of the house she and Owen had built together, watching her children work in the corrals. The ranch had prospered beyond anything they had dreamed in those early days. They now had over 100 horses, and Owen's reputation as a trainer had spread throughout California. People came from hundreds of miles away to buy his animals. But more than the success of the business, Grace was proud of the life they had created. A life built on love and respect, on partnership and mutual support. A life where her children never had to question their worth or their value. A life she had never thought possible. Owen came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything," Grace said. "Where we started, where we are now, how impossibly lucky I am." "We are lucky," Owen corrected. "Both of us." Grace turned in his arms to face him. His hair had more gray in it now, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to her, he was as handsome as the day he had ridden onto Hatch's ranch with horses to sell and a plan to set her free. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Taking me away from Nevada, giving up the life you might have had?" Owen looked at her with such open love that Grace felt her throat tighten. "Grace, you are the life I might have had. You are everything I never knew I wanted until I found you. Every day with you, every moment has been a gift. I have never regretted a single second." That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Owen and Grace sat on their porch as they had done so many times before. The California sky stretched overhead, vast and star-filled, and Grace thought about how far she had traveled, not just in miles but in spirit. She had been sold like property, treated as less than human, told that her disability made her worthless. But she had survived. And more than survived, she had built a beautiful life. She had found love, real love, the kind that saw her completely and cherished every part of who she was. She had created a family, raised children who would go into the world with kindness and strength. She had proven that the people who had tried to break her were wrong. "I am happy," she said aloud, surprised by the simple truth of the words. "I am truly happy." Owen squeezed her hand. "So am I, Grace, so am I." Years continued to pass, bringing with them all the joys and sorrows of a life well lived. Samuel married a woman from town and started his own ranch nearby. Clara became a teacher, passionate about education and justice. James took over the day-to-day operations of the horse breeding business, freeing Owen to work more with training. Grace became a grandmother, holding Samuel's first child, a girl they named Patricia after Mrs. Graves, who had passed away several years earlier. The baby looked up at Grace with wide, curious eyes, and Grace felt the circle of life completing itself. She was no longer the frightened girl who had been sold to pay debts. She was a woman who had built something lasting, something good. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Owen surprised Grace by taking her back to Reading. They stood in front of the boarding house where they had first found refuge. It was still there, now run by Mrs. Graves' niece, still offering shelter to those who needed it. "I wanted you to see it again," Owen said. "I wanted to remember where we started." Grace looked at the white house with its welcoming porch and thought about the terrified woman she had been when she first walked through that door. "I am not her anymore," she said softly. "No," Owen agreed. "You are not. You are stronger, happier, more confident. But Grace, you were always remarkable. Even when you were scared and hurt and broken, you were remarkable. I saw it then and I see it now." They visited the cemetery where Mrs. Graves was buried and laid flowers on her grave. Grace stood for a long moment, silently thanking the woman who had offered her a chance when she had needed it most. As they rode back to their ranch, Grace reflected on the path her life had taken. She thought about her stepfather and mother, who had sold her without a second thought. She had never seen them again after that day, and she found she had no desire to. They were part of a past she had moved beyond. She thought about Wendell Hatch, who had tried to claim ownership of her body and her labor. She had heard, years ago, that his ranch had failed, that he had lost everything and died alone and bitter. She felt no satisfaction in the news, just a distant sadness for the waste of a human life. And she thought about Owen, who had ridden into her life at the darkest moment and offered her something she had stopped believing existed: dignity, respect, love. He had not saved her because she was helpless, but because what was happening to her was wrong. And in doing so, he had given her the chance to save herself. Grace was 50 years old when her leg finally gave out entirely. Years of pain and overuse had taken their toll, and the doctor told her that she would need to use a wheelchair from now on. Grace had expected to feel devastated by the news, but instead, she felt only a sort of peaceful acceptance. Her body had carried her as far as it could. Now it was time to adapt. Owen built her a beautiful wooden wheelchair with careful craftsmanship and made modifications to their house so she could move around easily. And Grace discovered that even this change could not diminish her life. She still kept the books for the ranch, still helped with training the young horses from her chair, still gathered her children and grandchildren around her to share meals and stories. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild on the way filled the house with noise and love. Grace sat in her wheelchair on the porch, Owen in a chair beside her, and watched the chaos with deep contentment. Samuel came out to join them, his own hair now gray at the temples. "Mother," he said, "we wanted to give you something." He handed her a leather-bound book. "Clara and James and I put this together. It is your story, the story of your life. We wrote down everything you have told us over the years, everything we remember. We wanted your grandchildren and their children to know where they came from, to know about the woman who survived so much and built such a beautiful family." Grace opened the book and saw her own history written out in her children's handwriting. Her eyes blurred with tears as she read about the girl who had been sold, the woman who had found freedom, the life that had been built from ashes. "Thank you," she whispered. "This is the most precious gift anyone could give me." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Grace and Owen sat together in the moonlight. 40 years, Grace said. 40 years since you walked into my life and changed everything." "Best decision I ever made," Owen said, "falling in love with you." "I thought I was broken beyond repair," Grace said. "I thought my leg made me worthless, that no one could ever truly want me, but you saw something different. You saw me." "I saw the truth," Owen said simply. "I saw a woman of strength and grace and courage. I saw my future." He took her hand. "Grace, I am getting old. We both are. And I know that someday one of us will have to say goodbye to the other, but I want you to know that loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. If I had to do it all over again, I would not change a single thing." Grace squeezed his hand, this man who had given her everything, who had shown her what love really meant. "Neither would I," she said. "Not a single thing." They sat together under the stars, 2 people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a life that mattered. Grace thought about the girl she had been, crippled and sold, believing herself to be nothing. And she thought about the woman she had become, loved and valued, surrounded by a family that cherished her. Her stepfather had sold her to pay his debts. But Owen had given her something infinitely more valuable than money. He had given her back her dignity. He had given her a life worth living. And in return, she had given him her heart, her partnership, and 40 years of deep, abiding love. As the night deepened around them, Grace felt at peace. Her body might be failing, her youth long gone, but she had lived fully and loved completely. She had survived the worst the world could throw at her, and had emerged not just intact but triumphant. And as Owen helped her inside, his hand steady on the back of her wheelchair, Grace knew that this was how their story would end. Not with drama or tragedy, but with the quiet contentment of 2 people who had found each other and held on through everything. Who had built something lasting and good. Who had proven that love, real love, could heal even the deepest wounds. 5 years later, Grace passed away peacefully in her sleep, Owen holding her hand until the very end. She was buried on the ranch she loved, under a tree they had planted together in their first year of marriage. Her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren stood around her grave and told stories about her strength, her kindness, her wisdom. And Owen, now 70 years old and weathered by time, stood at her graveside and felt not just grief but gratitude. Gratitude for every day they had shared, for every moment of joy and struggle and love. Grace had been his partner, his love, his home. And though she was gone, the life they had built together continued in the children they had raised and the lessons they had taught. Owen lived another 3 years after Grace's death, and in that time, he often sat by her grave and talked to her, telling her about the grandchildren and the ranch and all the small happenings of daily life. And when his own time came, he went peacefully, knowing that he had lived well and loved deeply. They were buried side by side, their gravestones simple but meaningful. Grace's read. Grace McKenna, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she taught us that true worth comes from within. And Owen's read. Owen McKenna, beloved husband, father, and grandfather, he taught us that love sees what others miss. Their ranch continued for generations, passed down through their children and grandchildren, each new generation learning the story of how it all began. How a crippled girl had been sold like property, and how a cowboy had given her back her dignity. How two people had found each other in the darkest of circumstances and built something beautiful. How love, real and true and lasting, could transform even the most broken life into something whole. And on quiet evenings, when the California sun set over the rolling hills and the horses nickered softly in their corrals, you could almost feel their presence still. Owen and Grace, together forever, their love story complete, and their legacy secure in the lives they had touched and the family they had created. It was a story that deserved to be told, a reminder that every person has value, that kindness matters, and that true love can heal even the deepest wounds. It was a story of survival and redemption, of dignity reclaimed and a future built from hope. It was the story of they sold the crippled girl to pay their debts. The cowboy gave her dignity back, and it ended not with tragedy but with triumph, not with despair but with love that lasted beyond death itself.